wake up and realize the city sounds wrong. The bell rings too early. The market that was loud yesterday feels abandoned today. A neighbor died overnight and nobody wants to get close to the door. If it's already on your street, who's next? Before we rebuild this day in 1348 step by step, hit like, subscribe, and come with me. Because what you're about to see explains how an entire city tried to survive without understanding what was happening. In 1348, the day starts before the sun is fully up. Ovens lit, cold water hauled, mud underfoot, animals cutting through the street like they own it. The city runs tight, low smoke, sharp smells, scraps on the ground, people working because stopping isn't an option. The market is everything at once: food, rumor, trade, survival. And that's where the danger hides. When life is this intense, any off note stands out. Have you ever felt a place lose its rhythm? Here, that feeling turns into an omen. First comes the whisper. People are getting sick fast. Then comes the behavior. Folks crossing to the other side of the street, avoiding contact, cutting conversation short. A single cough in an alley makes people step back like the air itself turned hostile. But nobody talks about germs. That idea doesn't exist. What spreads instead are explanations that fit the time. Bad air, punishment, the body thrown out of balance, plain bad luck. And when there's no clear cause, fear becomes a system. The city writes invisible rules. Don't linger, don't touch, don't stand too close. Sounds extreme. In 1348, it's instinct. The tension changes level when the signs turn visible. Fever, chills, weakness, and those painful swellings in the armpit, groin, or neck. The buboes. Anyone who tries to help reaches for what they know. Hot water, cloths, vinegar, herbs, smoke, prayer. Sometimes it looks like improvement, and that false hope tricks people. Other times the collapse comes too fast, and panic finally has a face. Have you ever watched doubt become certainty, and certainty become fear? This is that moment. The city starts looking at its own body like it's hiding an enemy. Without the real cause, people explain it with what makes sense in daily life. Damp, filthy streets reinforce the idea of miasma. Corrupted air. Others blame the body's humors out of balance. Hot, cold, dry, wet. The practical result is the same. Purify the air with smoke. Carry herbs. Wash with vinegar. Avoid strong smells. Keep doors shut. It's an attempt to control the invisible by controlling the environment. And there's something deeply human in that. When you can't beat the problem, you at least need to feel like you're doing something. But the disease keeps advancing, and it crushes easy hope. When the world stops making sense, people run to the one place that still offers meaning. The church. Candles lit. Processions. Confessions. Vows. It isn't only faith, it's community and order in a moment when the street feels dangerous. But notice the paradox. Seeking protection brings people close together, and the unease grows. Still, the city pushes forward because this is the cultural tool it has, and you can feel it physically. Slow steps, lowered eyes, restless hands. Have you ever seen people searching for comfort while trying not to touch anything? That's this. A shelter that calms and threatens at the same time. The plague doesn't only take people, it takes the engine. Stalls close, workshops go quiet, carts arrive empty or don't arrive at all. Sellers are afraid, buyers are afraid, and the market loses its voice. With less goods, prices climb. With fewer hands, work breaks down. Then come the choices that knot your stomach. Go out to find food and risk contact, or stay in and risk hunger. In 1348, there's no clean solution. There's only the least terrible option today. Have you ever been trapped where every choice costs you? Here, that becomes routine. The city shifts into a daily risk economy. Home becomes a border. Doors get bolted. Windows stay shut. Damp cloth appears as an improvised barrier. Some entrances are marked to warn others and keep the curious away. It isn't theater. It's an attempt to organize the neighborhood with simple signs. Deliveries and help happen at the threshold. An object left on the ground, a quick step back, no touch, and that rewires daily life. Visiting becomes taboo. Conversation becomes a whisper. Closeness becomes a threat. Have you noticed how, in a crisis, the world shrinks until it fits behind a closed door? In 1348, life is measured in cracks and distance. The everyday turns into protocol. Even as the city stalls, someone has to keep the basics moving. Baking bread, hauling sacks, boiling water, delivering food. But now every task costs more. Fewer people, more fear, more exhaustion. Trades happen at a distance. Objects left on the ground. Hands avoiding skin. There's no speech-making heroism here, just stubborn survival. And that stubbornness holds the city together by a thread. Because without the invisible jobs, collapse accelerates. Have you ever seen the world depend on people almost nobody notices? Here, it's obvious. Routine continues, but crooked, tense, slower, and every trip outside feels like a crossing. There comes a point when the dominant sound changes, bell and cart. Burials turn rushed because there isn't time, there aren't arms, there isn't space. The cemetery becomes an improvised assembly line, not from coldness, but from necessity. Mass graves appear when individual burials can't keep up, and that shifts the city's mind. When funerals become daily, fear becomes atmosphere. You look down the street and understand this isn't a passing scare. It's a long crisis. Then another kind of tension is born. The logistics of death taking the place of life. It's heavy, it's real. In 1348, the city's rhythm gets marked by loss. When panic becomes routine, authorities try to impose rules, control the market, limit crowds, separate used clothing, organize burials. It isn't modern medicine. It's crisis management built on the beliefs of the time, especially fear of bad air and tainted objects. Notices go up. Ropes mark off areas. Inspectors record names, block goods, push crowds apart before they form. It's the city trying to keep being a city. And if you're into this faithful reconstruction of 1348, like the video and subscribe. Because from here, social tension rises, and the story hits the moment where the city feels like it can't breathe. When nobody understands the cause, fear goes hunting for someone to blame. Rumors become truth in minutes, and the street turns into a courtroom. Any coincidence becomes evidence for people who are desperate. Authorities try to thin crowds not only for health, because a nervous mob is a spark, and there's an ugly side that has to be said clearly. Persecutions and false accusations rise out of panic, not out of solutions. Have you ever seen collective anxiety rewrite a place's morals? Here, it happens fast. The city isn't just sick, it's suspicious. And suspicion breaks neighborhoods, breaks trade, breaks solidarity. The social crisis walks beside the medical one. With no concrete answer, many people return to ritual. Processions move through the streets with candles and crosses, trying to correct the world through penitence. Some groups punish themselves in public, believing pain can drive the evil away. In 1348, this feels like action. It gives a sense of control. But the paradox is obvious. More people together means more risk, even if nobody can explain why. The air fills with wax, smoke, and footsteps. Have you noticed how hope can turn into urgency? Here, faith becomes movement, and movement becomes danger. The city wants an answer, any answer, and it grabs the one it knows. It's collective effort, and it's also a signal of desperation. Here, collapse becomes visible without needing much explanation. The market empties, workshops fall silent, and the bell becomes the clock. There aren't enough people to dig, to carry, to keep the minimum alive. Streets go quiet in broad daylight. Doors shut early. Every step feels like crossing hostile ground. Have you ever felt that moment when normal is over? This is that, just scaled to an entire city. It isn't only illness, it's a breakdown of function. Logistics, work, neighborhood life, all at once. And that's why this part grips you. You can hear the change in the air, in the sound, in the movement. The city stops. And when a city stops, everybody feels it in their bones. After the peak, life becomes a practical strategy. Help is left at a window, at the threshold, on the ground. Take it, step back. Trades happen without contact. Routes are chosen where fewer people pass. Water is boiled when possible. Cloth and vinegar become daily tools. It isn't pretty. It isn't right by modern standards. But it's what people can do with the knowledge they have. And that matters. Survival isn't theory. It's habit. Have you seen how the mind adapts when there's no choice? Here, the city invents protocols on the fly. The goal stops being solve it and becomes endure. And enduring in 1348 is a chain of small decisions, repeated every day. Distrust becomes method, a line on the ground, a delivery on the ground, a quick retreat, no handshake, People avoid knocking. They leave a sign and disappear. Every object feels suspicious. Coins, cloth, bowls. The result is a city with physical distance and emotional distance, and it wears you down. Have you ever tried living on high alert for days? Now imagine weeks with no idea when it ends. Life contracts. Less talk, fewer meetings, less noise. Even habits shift. Eating, working, praying, everything adjusted to reduce contact. The plague isn't only disease, it's behavior reorganized. And that reorganization is exhausting because it forces you to think about everything all the time. Inside the house, the danger doesn't disappear. It circles. You ration food, put the candle out early. Listen to the street like you're waiting for bad news. Caring for the sick becomes a dilemma. Get close and risk it, or keep distance and carry guilt. There's no manual, no modern diagnosis, just signs and desperate attempts. And the bell keeps marking time, even when nobody wants to hear it. Have you ever had a night where silence feels heavy? Here, silence has a function. It means the city is hiding. Fear slips in through the window crack and through imagination. It changes how you sleep, how you breathe, how you wake up. Home becomes refuge and prison at once. In 1348, surviving also means surviving your own mind. Even in chaos, certain jobs can't stop. Food delivery, transport, bare maintenance, preparing cloth, organizing improvised washing points. But now it's done at a distance, a pole, a board, a retreat, a signal. It's logistics invented by force, repeated because it works well enough. And there's something deeply human in that. Nobody is trying to be a hero. They're trying to keep the city from falling apart completely. Have you seen how the world depends on small, repeated tasks? Here, it's literal. Without bread, water, transport, the crisis accelerates. So the city leans on whoever can still step outside. And that changes the value of effort. The basic becomes precious. The everyday holds the disaster back. When people disappear, services fail in a chain. Less cleaning, more waste. Less maintenance, more decay. Less order, more danger. Animals roam more freely. Streets gather filth. Workshops stay shut. Even those still working are physically at the limit. Urban collapse isn't a single event. It's accumulated wear. You look around and realize the city has a new face. Emptier, darker, quieter. And that feeds fear, because abandonment feels like threat. In 1348, infrastructure depends on people, and the plague pulls people out of the system. The public space stops feeling safe and starts feeling uncertain. The city doesn't break all at once. It fails in pieces, and each failure drags another down. Without knowing the real cause, people try to control what they can feel. Smell, smoke, dampness, fires, herbs, vinegar, cloth, all aimed at fighting corrupted air. Authorities also try to manage movement with ropes, notices, and restrictions, like space itself can be disciplined. It isn't modern science, but it's coherent for 1348. And there's a psychological detail. Changing the environment feels like action. Have you noticed how, when danger is invisible, we need to move something just to stay sane? Here, that becomes a collective routine. Smoke rises, vinegar shows up at doors, cloth covers faces, and the city tries to clean what it can't see. It may not fix the cause, but it sustains a thin hope of control. When the city feels like a threat, the road starts to look like escape. Bundles get tied, ropes tightened, carts creak toward the gate. But leaving isn't simple. Authorities control passage, redirect flow, try to prevent chaos. Outside the walls, fear doesn't vanish, it just changes scenery. Have you ever seen people say, "I'm leaving before it gets worse"? In 1348, that happens too. And with them goes rumor, panic, and often the disease itself. Migration becomes a survival attempt and also a driver of spread. At the gate, the city tries to protect itself. On the road, people try to save themselves. The conflict is constant. Individual versus collective, urgency versus control. The result is a world in motion with an uncertain destination. After enough time, the bell rings less. It isn't victory. It's the wave losing force, or the city running out of energy to react the same way. A door opens a crack. Someone looks outside. Someone sets up a stall again, slowly, cautious. Even the cemetery feels quieter for a day, and that different kind of silence brings a strange relief, almost guilty. Have you ever felt relief and weight at the same time? That's this. Relief because there's air again. Weight because absence is everywhere. Recovery starts like a test. One step into the street, one small trade, one sweep in front of a shop. The city relearns movement like it's walking on cracked ground, expecting to fall again. Reopening begins with basics, cleaning the entryway, pulling down old warnings, resetting the space. But it comes with counting. Empty houses, abandoned goods, fewer footsteps. Officials record, authorities reorganize. Families gather coins and try to start over. There's no celebration, just managing what's left. And the landscape changes. Doors shut for good. Workshops without owners. Silence at hours that used to be loud. Have you ever seen a city feel lighter and realized it's because fewer people are there? Here, it's unmistakable. The return is cautious. Fewer crowds, more distance, more rules. Recent trauma becomes the reference point. Everyone remembers the collapse, so nobody wants to push too far. The city returns, but it returns different, and that difference stays. With fewer people available, labor changes value. Anyone who can carry, fix, grow food, keep services moving becomes central. That reshapes negotiations, pay, and the relationship between workers and local authorities. It isn't theory, it's need. There aren't enough hands, so effort suddenly costs more. Have you noticed how a crisis changes what things are worth? Here it changes the price of human work, and that has social consequences. Demands for better conditions, tensions with those who control resources, a reshuffling of roles inside the city. Life doesn't snap back to the exact point it was before, because the structure has been moved. Workshops reopen with fewer workers, markets run with fewer stalls, families take on new tasks. The plague leaves an economic and social trail that continues after the worst passes. Slow change, but deep. Reorganization shows up in small routines: cleaning benches, separating goods, reinforcing notices, adjusting traffic flow, setting up washing points at doorways. Nobody calls it public policy, but it's a city trying to protect itself with whatever it can. The recent experience becomes protocol: less contact, more order, more caution with used objects. Officials measure, record, instruct. Workers repair doors and structures. Merchants return with more space between people. Have you seen trauma turn into habit? Here, it happens in daily life. Even without understanding the real cause, the city learns that order helps hold chaos back. Reopening isn't back to normal, it's making a new normal. And that new normal is born from scars. Fear doesn't vanish overnight, it becomes a rule. And with time, rule becomes culture. What remains isn't just numbers, it's absence. A simple mark on the ground can say more than any speech. Streets regain movement, but a quiet still sits underneath, like the city remembers. Survivors carry scenes in their heads: marked doors, repeated bells, carts passing, windows shutting. Even when the market returns, it returns different. More cautious, more restrained, more wary. Have you ever walked into a place where something happened and felt it in the air? Here, the whole city becomes that place. The memory spreads into habits: avoiding crowds for a while, distrusting used cloth, choosing distance. It isn't forgetting, it's living with a recent past, and it shapes generations. How people work, how they organize, how they understand risk. Life continues, but with a different texture, a shared scar. In the end, the Black Death was more than a disease. It was a stress test for social structure, labor, faith, and urban logistics. In 1348, it wasn't a king who kept the oven burning, or a noble who dug the grave. It was ordinary people holding up the basics while everything caved in. This reconstruction shows what happens when there's no explanation, only consequence. Routine becomes protocol, neighborhood becomes distance, and the city learns the hard way.
This video was a historical reconstruction made with AI, based on records from the period, created for narrative and artistic purposes.
And even when the worst passes, nothing returns exactly the same. If you want to see other eras rebuilt with this level of detail and fidelity, like the video, subscribe, and comment which period you want next.